Akkadian is an extinct East Semitic language that was spoken in ancient Mesopotamia, the earliest attested Semitic language. It used the cuneiform writing system, which was originally used to write the unrelated Ancient Sumerian, a language isolate. The language was named after the city of Akkad, a major center of Mesopotamian civilization during the Akkadian Empire, but the language itself predates the founding of Akkad by many centuries. The mutual influence between Sumerian and Akkadian had led scholars to describe the languages as a sprachbund. Akkadian proper names were first attested in Sumerian texts from around the mid-3rd millennium BC. From the second half of the 3rd millennium BC, texts fully written in Akkadian begin to appear. Hundreds of thousands of texts and text fragments have been excavated to date, covering a vast textual tradition of mythological narrative, legal texts, scientific works, correspondence, political and military events, and many other examples. By the 2nd millennium BC, two variant forms of the language were in use in Assyria and Babylonia, known as Assyrian and Babylonian respectively. For centuries, Akkadian was the native language in Mesopotamian nations such as Assyria and Babylonia. Because of the might of various Mesopotamian empires, such as the Akkadian Empire, Old Assyrian Empire, Babylonian Empire, and Middle Assyrian Empire, Akkadian became the lingua franca of much of the ancient Near East. However, it began to decline during the Neo-Assyrian Empire around the 8th century BC, being marginalized by Aramaic during the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III. By the Hellenistic period, the language was largely confined to skeleton priests working in temples in Assyria and Babylonia. The last known Akkadian cuneiform document dates from the 1st century AD. Classification: Akkadian belongs with the other Semitic languages in the Near Eastern branch of the Afro-Asiatic family of languages, a language family native to East Africa, which then spread to West, Northwest, and Northeast Africa. Within the Near Eastern Semitic languages, Akkadian forms an East Semitic subgroup. This group distinguishes itself from the Northwestern South Semitic languages by its SOV word order, while the other Semitic languages usually have either a VSO or SVO order. This novel word order is due to the influence of the Sumerian substratum, which has an SOV order. Additionally, Akkadian is the only Semitic language to use the prepositions ina and ana. Other Semitic languages like Arabic and Aramaic have the prepositions by, be and la. The origin of the Akkadian spatial prepositions is unknown. In contrast to most other Semitic languages, Akkadian has only two non-sibilant fricatives, h and r. Akkadian lost both the glottal and pharyngeal fricatives, which are characteristic of the other Semitic languages. Up until the Old Babylonian period, the Akkadian sibilants were exclusively affricated. History and writing. Old Akkadian is preserved on clay tablets dating back to California, 2500 BC. It was written using cuneiform, a script adopted from the Sumerians using wedge-shaped symbols pressed in wet clay, as employed by Akkadian scribes. The adapted cuneiform script could represent either Sumerian logograms, Sumerian syllables, Akkadian syllables, or phonetic complements. However, in Akkadian the script practically became a fully fledged syllabic script, and the original logographic nature of cuneiform became secondary. The logograms for frequent words such as God and temple continued to be used. For this reason, the sign an can on the one hand be a logogram for the word ilum and on the other signify the god Anu or even the syllable an. Additionally, this sign was used as a determinative for divine names. Another peculiarity of Akkadian cuneiform is that many signs do not have a well-defined phonetic value. Certain signs, such as a, do not distinguish between the different vowel qualities, nor is there any coordination intonation in the other direction. The syllable sound, for example, is rendered by the sign sound, but also by the sign n. Both of these are often used for the same syllable in the same text. Cuneiform was in many ways unsuited to Akkadian. Among its flaws was its inability to represent important phonemes in Semitic, including aglottal stop, pharyngeals, and emphatic consonants. In addition, cuneiform was a syllabary writing system, i.e. a consonant plus vowel comprised one writing unit, frequently inappropriate for a Semitic language made up of triconsonantal roots. Development Akkadian is divided into several varieties based on geography and historical period. Old Akkadian 2500–1950 BC, Old Babylonian, Old Assyrian 1950 to 1530 BC, Middle Babylonian, Middle Assyrian 1530 to 1000 BC, Neo-Babylonian, Neo-Assyrian 1000 to 600 BC, Late Babylonian 600 BC to 100 AD. The earliest known Akkadian inscription was found on a bowl-letter, addressed to the very early pre-Sargonic king Meskhetiamnuna of Ur by his queen Gansaman, who is thought to have been from Akkad. The Akkadian Empire, established by Sargon of Akkad, introduced the Akkadian language as a written language, adapting Sumerian cuneiform orthography for the purpose. During the Middle Bronze Age, the language virtually displaced Sumerian, which is assumed to have been extinct as a living language by the 18th century BC. Old Akkadian, which was used until the end of the 3rd millennium BC, differs from both Babylonian and Assyrian, and was displaced by these dialects. By the 21st century BC, Babylonian and Assyrian, which were to become the primary dialects, were easily distinguishable. Old Babylonian, along with the closely related dialect Mariotic, is clearly more innovative than the Old Assyrian dialect and the more distantly related Eblate language. For this reason, forms like Luprus are first encountered in Old Babylonian instead of the older Luprus. On the other hand, Assyrian developed certain innovations as well, such as the Assyrian vowel harmony. Eblate is even more archaic, retaining a productive dual and a relative pronoun declined in case, number and gender. Both of these had already disappeared in Old Akkadian. Old Babylonian was the language of King Hammurabi and his code, which is one of the oldest collections of laws in the world. The Middle Babylonian period started in the 16th century BC. The division is marked by the Kassite invasion of Babylonia around 1550 BC. The Kassites, who reigned for 300 years, gave up their own language in favor of Akkadian, but they had little influence on the language. At its apogee, Middle Babylonian was the written language of diplomacy of the entire ancient Orient, including Egypt. During this period, a large number of loanwords were included in the language from Northwest Semitic languages and Hurran. However, the use of these words was confined to the fringes of the Akkadian-speaking territory. Middle Assyrian served as a lingua franca in much of the ancient Near East of the Late Bronze Age. During the Neo-Assyrian Empire, Neo-Assyrian began to turn into a chancellery language, being marginalized by Old Aramaic. Under the Achaemenids, Aramaic continued to prosper, but Assyrian continued its decline. The language's final demise came about during the Hellenistic period, when it was further marginalized by Koine Greek. Even though Neo-Assyrian cuneiform remained in use in literary tradition well into Parthian times, the latest known text in cuneiform Babylonian is an astronomical text dated to 75 AD. The youngest texts written in Akkadian date from the 3rd century AD. Old Assyrian developed as well during the 2nd millennium BC, but because it was a purely popular language, kings wrote in Babylonian. Few long texts are preserved. From 1500 BC onwards, the language is termed Middle Assyrian. During the first millennium BC, Akkadian progressively lost its status as a lingua franca. In the beginning, from around 1000 BC, Akkadian and Aramaic were of equal status, as can be seen in the number of copied texts. Clay tablets were written in Akkadian, while scribes writing on papyrus and leather used Aramaic. For this period on, one speaks of Neo-Babylonian and Neo-Assyrian. Neo-Assyrian received an upswing in popularity in the 10th century BC when the Assyrian kingdom became a major power with the Neo-Assyrian Empire, but texts written exclusively in Neo-Assyrian disappear within 10 years of Nineveh's destruction in 612 BC, after the end of the Mesopotamian kingdoms, which fell due to the Persian conquest of the area. Akkadian disappeared as a popular language. However, the language was still used in its written form, and even after the Greek invasion under Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC, Akkadian was still a contender as a written language, but spoken Akkadian was likely extinct by this time, or at least rarely used. The latest positively identified Akkadian text comes from the 1st century AD. Decipherment. The Akkadian language began to be rediscovered when Carsten Niebuhr in 1767 was able to make extensive copies of cuneiform texts and published them. In Denmark, the deciphering of the texts started immediately, and bilinguals, in particular Old Persian Akkadian bilinguals, were of great help. Since the texts contained several royal names, isolated signs could be identified, and were presented in 1802 by Georg Friedrich Groteffen. By this time it was already evident that Akkadian was a Semitic language, and the final breakthrough in deciphering the language came from Edward Hincks, Henry Rawlinson and Jules Oppert in the middle of the 19th century. The Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago recently completed a 21-volume dictionary of the Akkadian language, which is available commercially and online. Dialects. The following table summarizes the dialects of Akkadian certainly identified so far. Some researchers believe that the Old Akkadian variant used in the older texts is not an ancestor of the later Assyrian and Babylonian dialects, but rather a separate dialect that was replaced by these two dialects and which died out early. Isolate, formerly thought of as yet another Akkadian dialect, is now generally considered a separate East Semitic language. Phonetics and Phonology. Because Akkadian as a spoken language is extinct and no contemporary descriptions of the pronunciation are known, little can be said with certainty about the phonetics and phonology of Akkadian. Some conclusions can be made, however, due to the relationship to the other Semitic languages and variant spellings of Akkadian words. Consonants. The following table gives the consonant sounds distinguished in the Akkadian use of cuneiform, with the presumed pronunciation in IPA transcription according to Hunegard and Woods, which most closely corresponds to recent reconstructions of Proto-Semitic phonology. The parenthesized sign following is the transcription used in the literature in the cases where that sign is different from the phonetic sign. This transcription has been suggested for all Semitic languages by the Deutsche Morgenländische Gesellschaft, and is therefore known as DMG Umschrift. Reconstruction. Akkadian emphatic consonants are typically reconstructed as adjectives, which are thought to be the oldest realization of emphatics across the Semitic languages. For the sibilants, traditionally per-second has been held to be post-alveolar and per-second Z and per-second analyzed as fricatives. but attested assimilations in Akkadian suggest otherwise. For example, when the possessive suffix su is added to the root awat, it is written awasu even though sometimes would be expected. This change from ts to ss is unexplained if persecond and persecond are both fricatives, especially since a shift of persecond to persecond does not occur in other contexts. This is clarified by the interpretation that persecond s form a pair of voiceless coronal affricates, asterisk s is a voiceless coronal fricative, and asterisk z is a voiced coronal affricate fricative. The assimilation is then NGT, which is quite common across languages. In this vein, an alternative transcription of asterisk s is asterisk s with the macron below indicating a soft articulation in Semitic transcription. As Akkadian evolved into the northern Assyrian and southern Babylonian dialects, Assyrian retained the pronunciation of s while Babylonian seems to have pronounced it. The phoneme has traditionally been interpreted as a trill, but its pattern of alternation with per suggests it was a velar fricative. In the Hellenistic period, Akkadian was transcribed using the Greek rho, indicating it was pronounced similarly as an alveolar trill. Descent from Proto-Semitic. Several Proto-Semitic phonemes are lost in Akkadian. The Proto-Semitic glottal stop asterisk, as well as the fricatives asterisk h are lost as consonants, either by sound change or orthographically, but they gave rise to the vowel quality not exhibited in Proto-Semitic. The voiceless lateral fricatives merged with the sibilants as in Canaanite, leaving 19 consonantal phonemes. Old Akkadian preserved the asterisk s phoneme longest, but it eventually merged with asterisk s beginning in the Old Babylonian period. The following table shows Proto-Semitic phonemes and their correspondences among Akkadian, Modern Standard Arabic and Tiberians Hebrew. The vowels. The existence of a back mid-vowel o has been proposed, but the cuneiform writing gives no good proof for this. There is limited contrast between different u signs in lexical texts, but this scribal differentiation may reflect the superimposition of the Sumerian phonological system, for which an o phoneme has also been proposed, rather than a separate phoneme in Akkadian. All consonants and vowels appear in long and short forms. Long consonants are represented in writing as double consonants, and long vowels are written with a macron. This distinction is phonemic, and is used in the grammar. For example, iprasu versus iprasu. The stress patterns of Akkadian are disputed, with some authors claiming that nothing is known of the topic. There are however certain points of reference, such as the rule of vowel syncope, and some forms in the cuneiform that might represent the stressing of certain vowels. However, attempts at identifying a rule for stress have so far been unsuccessful. Wainigad claims that stress in Akkadian is completely predictable. In his syllable typology there are 3 syllable words, light, heavy, and super heavy. If the last syllable is super heavy, it is stressed, otherwise the rightmost heavy syllable is stressed. If the word contains only light syllables, the first syllable is stressed. A rule of Akkadian phonology is that certain short vowels are dropped. The rule is that the last vowel of a succession of syllables that end in a short vowel is dropped. For example, the declinational root of the verbal adjective of a root prs is paris. Thus the masculine singular nominative is parsum, but the feminine singular nominative is parastum. Additionally, there is a general tendency of syncope of short vowels in the later stages of Akkadian.